Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's such a pleasure and a thrill to be here. I'm Stephanie Honey. I used to be a New Zealand trade negotiator. So for a long time, I worked particularly on agriculture negotiations in the WTO, but I've done lots of other trade negotiations as well on investment and services and non-tariff barriers, all sorts of things. But for about the last 15 years or so, I've been a consultant. So I still do lots of work with the New Zealand government, but also other governments, with institutions. I've done lots of projects for the Asian Development Bank, for instance, and the OECD. And so it's a real thrill to have a chance to share some of that knowledge with you. We have until 4 o'clock or a little bit before to go through this fantastic subject of digital trade. But before we get into that, I wanted to just lay out a few ground rules for the way I like to do things. The first thing is, I know a lot about the subject, but I'm by no means the only person who does in this room. I'm sure all of you, whether in your personal lives or your professional lives, have some great insights that you can share so that we can all benefit. So my first sort of ground rule is, please treat this as an interactive session. Share your comments, share your thoughts. There's so much richness in this room, I'm sure. And also, in my teaching that I do a lot of, I always say there's no such thing as a dumb question. So I might use some jargon or my terrible New Zealand accent, you might not be able to understand what I'm saying anyway. If you don't understand something or you'd like me to explain it or explain a term, please interrupt me, because, you know, I can guarantee if you are wondering, what is she talking about? Someone else will be thinking that as well. So it's good for everybody to do that, and I really welcome it. So this should be an interactive session. Jump in with your questions, your comments as we go through. We've got some fun, an exercise to do at the end, which I think you will hopefully enjoy. But on the way through as well, I really love to ask you questions, because I think that's the best way to do it. It's just terribly boring to sit there and listen while somebody talks at you for a couple of hours. So let's not do that. Please chip in when I ask you things, and you know, we'll have hopefully a great time. So what I thought we could do today. Maybe I've turned it off. Yeah. Oh, the battery. I could just do it on. I can just do it on here. Does that work? The mouse. The mouse. Yeah. There you go. Ironic that, you know, we have some digital problems with our digital trade session, but there you go. So I thought we could go through some very basic up to much more sophisticated ideas about this. Ask the question, what are we talking about when we talk about digital trade? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the trade rules? And where's it all going? And I think one of the reasons why I love this subject is it's just changing so quickly. Lots of the trade rule book has not even been written yet. So who knows, maybe, you know, over the next few years, you will be coming up with some amazing innovations in this space, because there's certainly a lot that needs to be done in writing the rules. So we're going to go through all of those issues. We're going to have a breakout discussion, a sort of more strategic discussion for you all to brainstorm some ideas for Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu, and then we'll report back at the end and finish at about 4. Yeah, is it okay? Yeah. Okay, thanks. So where we might start is with some very basic questions, you know, the who, what, how of digital trade. But before even that, I would love to ask you all, who here has had anything to do with digital trade, either personally or professionally? Have you worked on it? Have you had anything to do with it? No, not too many people nodding around the room. Who here has bought something on Amazon or Alibaba? Put your hand up. Who has used their phone to make a payment? Who has looked up something online? You have probably all done that as a digital trade transaction. So I think one of the fascinating things about this area is people would say, oh, digital trade, I don't know what that is, and it's nothing to do with me, but actually it's pervasive. Lots and lots of the way we live, the way we work, the way we do business, the way we consume things is now being done digitally. And it's fascinating because, you know, I asked you who's bought something online, who's watched a streaming, you know, do you watch Netflix or whatever? That is actually you as an individual being involved in digital trade. So the whole way that trade works is a very different kettle of fish. So let's come back to a more, whoops, sorry, this is probably going to drive everyone crazy. Let's come back to sort of answering that first question. What are some examples of digital trade? So I've just talked about a few. Are there any others that you think of? You know, just like, oh, I bought something on a platform. Any other examples that come to your mind?
We're going to give examples of digital.
Yes, any examples. So for instance, I might say, oh, I listen to some music on Spotify. Any other examples that come to your mind? Exactly, yeah, online payments. Exactly. Yeah. Well, here are a few. Yeah. Oops. Okay, I'll get the hang of it by the end probably. So here are a few examples that I have put together. So, you know, the platforms, as they called, so the Alibaba or Amazon, or there are probably many more in your own countries that I'm not familiar with. Netflix, of course, so there's a whole world of interactive media. It's for entertainment, music, film, whatever. Does anybody have teenage children? Do you know what that is? Yeah, that one's actually Minecraft, but yeah, same thing. So I've got two teenage boys, so that this is their whole life, playing video games. But you know, there's the gaming as well. Does anybody recognise this one? Yeah, that's right. Where would we be without ChatGPT? So there are lots of different ways. Welcome. Lots of different ways that these transactions happen in the digital economy that we group together under this digital trade heading. And there's, you know, not that much that is in common with these things, except for the fact that they are the sort of the lifeblood of them is the digital sphere with data and, you know, internet connectivity. But when we look at it specifically around trade, we can see that there's actually been a massive transformation of what we buy, how we buy it, how the transaction is conducted, how the thing is consumed, that is right along the trade pipeline. And so I've sort of tried to illustrate that by grouping things into these categories. They're just categories I made up, but you know, you can sort of get the idea, I think. So starting up here, digital enablers of trade. So these aren't necessarily things that are being traded, but the trade happens with the help of things like paperless trade. So I think, you know, there's quite a lot of work going on paperless trade, electronic documents and things like that, digital supply chain and blockchain, fintech, e-payments we've talked about, those sort of enablers of the transaction. Then we've also got frontier technology, so ChatGPT and lots of other generative AI applications, but also things that are very sort of the practical interface with the real world. So things like the Internet of Things. Have you guys come across that too? Internet of Things, IoT. Yeah, so that's like sensors that feed back data so you can understand a lot. You know, your fridge might be connected or whatever. Robotics and automation. So that's often at the manufacturing level. Lots of the activity is now being done with a sort of digital brain and maybe in a factory or in an automated way. 3D printing. And this is a fascinating area of trade where you maybe used to buy a piece of equipment, but now you could just download the software and print it at home. And even really frontier technologies like quantum computing. You might have seen the pictures of those sort of weird big structures. I don't pretend to understand how that works, but apparently it's amazing. And then there are sort of the goods and services that look more like trade. that are either digitally ordered and digitally delivered. So in the services space, essentially, so Netflix and gaming, all those things, electronic books. So often things that might once have been a physical product, like a CD, if you're as old as I am, you remember CDs, or, you know, a physical book that is now, you can consume it digitally. And then there are also the sort of this weird physical digital world. So e-commerce platforms, but things like Uber or Airbnb, where there's a sort of digital part of the transaction, but the way the actual service or good is delivered is in the physical real world. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just inherently digital. And when you talk about digital trade, most people probably think, oh, it's something to do with this. It's kind of cloud computing or data storage, search or video calling. But all of those, for our purposes today, we're going to say are digital trade. How much is this worth? A lot. So it's very hard to count the digital economy, but the clever people at UNCTAD have come up with this number a couple of years ago now, so it's probably even bigger, maybe 15, 16, 17% of the global economy is now digital. And that probably is an undercount of what it is, but, you know, it's well over half of services trade globally as well. So if we'd done this course 10 years ago, these numbers would have been tiny, but it's just growing amazingly. And the thing that is driving the growth is this very peculiar digital lifeblood, which is data flows. So essentially you can't have digital trade without some sort of data flowing across a border. So this is the little packets of information, often broken up into tiny little bits that together make up the content that flow across the border, and data itself can also be traded, but for our purposes we'll just think of it as the thing that makes the trade go. And you can see on this a very interesting chart. So 25 or so years ago, or 20 years ago in 2004, there were cross-border data flows kind of between the US and Europe and maybe a bit into Asia, but not really much. You can see us down the bottom of the planet here, not a lot going on there. And then over these last couple of decades, there's been this incredible growth in data flows. So as the lines get thicker, it means there's more, and then a sort of a step change up in order of magnitude to these orange ones. So this only goes up as far as 2004, but the trajectory is enormous. So if we did it today, the snapshot would be even bigger and thicker. And you can see finally Oceania and the Pacific have sort of made it onto the map. But, you know, the trajectory is definitely fast growth. And even as far back as 2014, those data flows were actually worth more than global goods trade. So it's a big deal, basically. Are there any questions so far? Well, feel free to jump in if anything I'm saying doesn't make sense for whatever reason. And so I thought it was probably worth just unpacking a little bit. What is this growth? So we know data is growing. What else is growing? So e-commerce, which is what most, you know, if you ask somebody in the street, oh, what's digital trade? They say, oh, do you mean e-commerce? So when we talk about that, most people are thinking about platforms. So I bought something on Amazon, or I bought a book on my Kindle or whatever. That part of digital trade is definitely growing. Most people would probably think about, oh, well, I, as a consumer, am buying something on a platform. But actually, much more important is business-to-business platform-based trade. So that dwarfs what the consumer piece is. And the World Economic Forum estimates that, you know, sort of nearly 3/4 of global growth over the next sort of decade or so will come through platforms. So that's a very important part of the digital economy. Unfortunately, it's also one of the areas that's sort of least regulated. There are lots of big, interesting economic and legal questions about competition and access and all sorts of things. If you talk to small businesses, they'll say, well, yeah, platforms are great. I can get access to customers, but you've got to pay. So, you know, some very interesting issues there. Another really interesting big growth space is around services. So a lot of digital trade is services trade, and this as a part of global trade is incredibly successful. So you can see here, I thought just for illustrative purposes, I would show this part, this graph is showing essentially goods trade primarily through, the last 100 years or more. We've had ups and downs, but in the sort of post-war period, it's been a steady upwards trajectory until we hit the global financial crisis. And since then, it's kind of stagnated, what McKinsey has called globalization, not globalization. But then when we look at what's happening with digitally delivered services, you can see where goods have tracked along and services have gone up and down. Digitally delivered services are growing, incredibly fast. And particularly in developed economies, but actually lots of developing economies have got fast growth as well. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. So it's certainly, not necessarily a given, but as a category, it's really outpacing every other kind of trade. And then what does this mean for policymakers, for regulators? There's lots of really big challenges around, well, how do we regulate this stuff? How do we get value out of it? How do we participate? But also, I'm not sure if some of you are here involved with customs or sort of border processes. This has been a real challenge at the border. So as we've seen this trade in parcels, me as an individual can now import things digitally. Border agencies are having to contend with lots and lots of small parcels where once they might have just had a nice big container they could look at. So there are lots of policy implications. How do you resource this? How do you fund it? How do you make sure it's actually what it is? And lots of new tools for trade facilitation on the flip side of that. So lots of ways to make this easier if you've got the infrastructure, the people, the skills and everything else. Any questions so far? Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what it is from our own sort of personal experience, what it is in a sort of trade policy perspective, but let's get down to the nuts and bolts. What is the definition of this thing? And over the last quite a few years, maybe 5 or so years, the big economic institutions, so UNCTAD, OECD, IMF, WTO, have been working on, well, how do we define this thing? They've come up with this definition in a really great resource, which is called the Handbook on Measuring Digital Trade. So if you're involved in this area at all, I really recommend that. It seems very technical and boring, but actually it's got lots of great examples of how to understand the kind of economic and legal implications of this. But it has also come up with this definition. So it's looking at, essentially, it's less about what than how. So it's digitally enabled transactions of trade in goods and services, whether they're digitally or physically delivered. So with traditional trade, we might have been thinking a lot about what is being traded. This is very much about how is it being traded. And it's got some fascinating implications if you're an economist or a lawyer, or interested in sort of consumer behavior or competition policy. It's a really fascinating space because it's really hard to get your arms around it. What is it? How do we count it? How do we know if it's growing if we don't even know how much it's worth in the first place? It's really hard for your statistics departments to measure it. Although this handbook that I mentioned has got a lot of good, kind of preliminary ideas there. But it also changes the economics really significantly. So anybody could be involved in digital trade, not just as a consumer, but also as a supplier. So any one of you could go home and sell some services on the internet to a customer on the other side of the world. It's that easy. It's low cost. It's very straightforward. But also it's got these other weird sort of network effects that you don't see in the real physical economy around, the first person to think of the clever idea gets the sort of the first mover advantage and the network effects. We've talked about individual consumers are now involved in trade. It's not companies, it's people. And also this other strange thing, which is that when a transaction happens, there may not necessarily be a financial transaction, but there's an exchange of value. So you get a benefit. So for instance, if you do a search, you're getting the benefit of that information. What do you think you're paying for that free service? What do you think the company's getting out of that transaction? Yeah, so say you do a Google search. Why is Google providing that search thing? You don't have to pay for it, just hop on, you search it up. Data, that's right, because data is incredibly valuable. They can understand so much about us. Here, think about reading from what have you searched and all the other little bits of, tiny little packets of information that can be gathered. So there's a whole lot of value that's created in the digital economy that doesn't have a dollar value attached to it, but is definitely worth something. And I've just got a fun little cartoon here, two innocent little pigs. Isn't it great? We have nothing to pay for the barn. And the other guy's saying, yeah, even the food's free, but they're going to be paying it at some point, aren't they? Pork chop for dinner. Okay, so I'm a vegetarian, so I'm allowed to make jokes about, poor little pigs. But so it's fascinating, and it's, there's a lot of sort of kind of cold hard commercial stuff going on, growth, all the good things we like that, traders makes, sort of justifies. But there's a whole lot of other stuff as well, which is another one of the reasons why I love this subject. That's actually got nothing to do with trade, but governments are now starting to regulate, or consumers are concerned about, to do with digital trade that aren't about trade. What are some of those things, do you think? Got a scared looking lady peeping through a peephole. What do you think might be implied by that?
Like for trade, right?
Yeah.
Data protection.
Yes, exactly. So privacy, fantastic. Yeah. Anything else?
Consumer protection.
Yeah, consumer protection, that's right. Data security. Yeah. What are we seeing between the US and China these days? A lot of friction about national security, economic security. So lots of these things that aren't actually trade are affecting the way people are regulating and participating in the digital economy. So here are a few of those. We've covered off a lot of them. Privacy, data sovereignty. So who gets to control and own the data? All those issues around safety, trust, misinformation, disinformation. We're having an election in New Zealand later this year, and there's already been talk of people using AI for like fake ads and things. Inclusion in the digital divide. So wonderful if you can surf the digital wave. What about if you don't have infrastructure, skills, apps, a device, you just get left behind, too bad for you. Lots of unintended consequences from AI, that I'm sure we can all imagine that. We've all seen the movies of AI going out of control, Terminator. And then that whole sort of national security and economic security. So were you going to add something? No? Yeah. So I think, it's important to bear this in mind, because a lot of the regulation that we're now seeing in this space isn't just about, oh, trade's good, how do I make trade happen? Or I don't actually like the trade, how do I stop it? It's driven by some of these things, but they have an impact on actually how do my small businesses participate in selling online or whatever. Which is a nice lead into barriers to digital trade. Before we get into this segment, are there any questions? Okay, so let me ask you this. What do digital trade barriers look like? So we've got a little bit of an understanding about what does digital trade look like? What are some of the issues around it? What would a barrier look like, do you think? Is it a tiny man with a sledgehammer smashing up a semiconductor?
Infrastructure.
IT infrastructure, definitely a barrier, isn't it? If you haven't got, what's that thing called? Starlink, thank you. If you've got Starlink or fibre or whatever, how are you actually going to get onto it, for sure?
The divide.
Yep, absolutely. If you're a small business in a small country that's developing, good luck.
The cultural laws, like legal frameworks.
Legal frameworks, exactly. So lots of these barriers are regulation. Governments say no data flowing, or you can have it flowing, but we need to see a copy, or you actually need to have a physical presence in the country before you can sell digital services, or anything else you can think of. Yeah.
Cybersecurity.
Perfect. Yep, that's definitely an inhibitor and, potentially a huge risk, isn't it? If you put your data online or, some nasty hacker gets into your business, that's not a good outcome. Cost, absolutely. Yeah. And I know, and particularly in Pacific economies, that's a really very serious consideration. Restrictions, yeah. So I've divided these up into what we'd call sort of trade barriers, but then also just as important, particularly in the Pacific, are sort of domestic barriers, if you want to group them that way. So in the trade space, probably if you read anything at all about digital trade, any literature or studies from the OECD or whatever, the big thing they will highlight is data restrictions. What does this look like? Well, it looks like probably a government regulation, or, actual sort of the great Chinese firewall, you've probably the great, firewall of China, regulatory or physical barriers to the data actually flowing, being able to access, a site, or being able to, kind of share data, or where you have to process it. Lots of these don't actually really look like a trade regulation. They might be something that says privacy, you've got a pop up that says, do you agree to your data being processed or whatever? There are also lots of restrictions in particular categories of data. So especially financial services, lots of countries very nervous about letting that data go across a border. Cybersecurity, as the gentleman in the corner mentioned, well, now we're also seeing these national security things of that's a sensitive sector, you can't, do anything in that sector. There are also lots of restrictions around e-payments. So I think a few people have mentioned payments, but often banks, the incumbent banks, are not very happy about that happening, or it might be very expensive to do a payment online, you pay a fee or whatever. Or other frictions, like it just doesn't work as instantaneously as it should. Content restrictions. So if you've talked to anybody in the video gaming sector, they have to be really careful about what's in their video games in some markets. China, for instance, you can't have any images of, skeletons or death or whatever, but also things like online platforms, TikTok or YouTube or whatever, there might be content moderation there. What is local presence requirements? People might be involved in the services trade regulation. Do you know what a local presence requirement is? Or have a guess?
Local presence requirement.
Yeah.
Is it like commercial presence?
Exactly. So yeah, you can sell your services, but I need to see the office or the business registration in my country, before you're allowed to service the customers there. And this can even be the case where your whole business model might be cloud. You would never be in a room with your customer, but you might still need to have a local presence. And similarly, these are sort of more traditional services restrictions. So a joint venture requirement, yes, you can sell the services, but I need my local people to be on the board of directors, or those sorts of requirements. And then overall, there's this enormous growing weight of regulation, compliance, as we see in all kinds of trade as well, but of the sort of complex set of rules, regulations, trade agreements, domestic regulations. They all might be perfectly valid and legitimate and there for a good reason. But if you're a small business coming from a small country, it's a nightmare to actually think, how do I do business? Because I just don't even understand what I'm meant to be doing. Unfortunately, we saw those tables of, data growing and services growing. Unfortunately, our old friend protectionism and restrictions are growing as well. So these are some charts from a WTO report, but drawing on an OECD index of digital services trade restrictions that really, I think, illustrates how, particularly in the Asia Pacific, you can see over time the restrictions are actually going up. And I guess, as many decades of being a trade negotiator, you'd hope the lines would be going down, not up. But unfortunately, a space that was once not really regulated at all is now increasingly regulated and increasingly restricted. And those barriers are very much in the area of sort of infrastructure, connectivity, including data flows, payments, electronic transactions. So, do documents or payments or whatever actually go across a border, and a whole lot of others. So unfortunately, it's an area where the promise of the digital economy is, it's a constant tension between can we get the benefit without also having this sort of restrictive environment as well. And then something that you've all mentioned entirely, compellingly, is some of these domestic issues are as much of a barrier to trade as some foreign government slapping on a restriction. So things like infrastructure, those basic regulatory building blocks, whether you've got consumer protection legislation or data protection, e-payments, a lack of interoperability. So the standards, the people might want to do business together, but if the standards don't fit together, you've got a problem, or the systems can't talk to each other. And then the sort of the human side of this, the skills, the literacy, the comfort with it. And then something else that particularly I talk to lots of New Zealand technology businesses. If I say to them, oh, what's your headache? Tell me about your trade barriers. They say, forget that. I can't get the people to scale up my business. I don't have the talent, as it's called, the digital talent, and I can't get the funding. So lots of little digital businesses might have a great idea, but they can't scale. And that's critical to being a trade, participant, to have enough size. And you can't do either of those things if you don't have skilled people and money. We were having a little break. 30 minutes. 30 minutes, okay, perfect. All right. Are there any questions so far? No? Does anybody feel the need for a little brain break? I do this terrible thing, so silly and embarrassing, but it's quite fun to get people energized. Shall we? I can see, it's very hot. Let's just do a quick exercise. Hot. Yeah. All right. Or no, or maybe not. I'm hot, but
It's okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's they are not.
Okay, they're not too hot. Let's just have a brain break anyway, because this is a really fun one, I promise you. You'll all be secretly hating me, I can take it. So we'll come up, we'll stand in a big circle. So everybody stand up, please, humbly. And we'll stand in a circle in the middle, if we can kind of, you need to be close enough to the person next door to this crazy thing. So this is a fun thing called gotcha. We need to be in a circle where we're sort of next door to each other. Yeah. So come on in, don't be shy. Come on, everybody. Oops, that's it. Okay. So this is silly, but apparently it's to do with both sides of your brains, working together. So it's called gotcha, and there shouldn't be any touching involved if you're internally screaming right now, don't worry, but it's all to do with how quick your brain is. So I want you to take your right hand and point up to the sky. And then take your left hand and put it out like a plate. And now just point your finger down onto your neighbour. So I'm going to point to you, you point. What are you doing that? You point to the next door neighbour. Because what we're going to do is when I say gotcha, so I'm just explaining first, don't do this. When I say gotcha, your brain has to simultaneously try to grab the next door neighbour and pull that finger up, okay? It's very silly, but we'll do it practice run. So I'm going to count to 3 and then say gotcha, and remember try to grab and pull. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, gotcha. Okay, that was pretty good, that was pretty good. I did that. Now, I've got, we're going to be order. Are you ready?
Oh,
It could be at any second.
Oh, sorry.
Gotcha. No. Now, that was pretty good, but now I'm really going to test you. We're going to do it with the other hand. So put your left hand up to the ceiling, your right hand out like a plate. Okay, take your pointy finger and point it down over your neighbour who's going to try and grab it. Are you ready? Oh, yeah, it's hard. Even harder to get the fingers pointing. Okay, you ready? You ready? You ready? Gotcha. Oh, very good. Okay.
What's the?
But the idea is your two sides of your brain have to work together to, you know, one side is telling you and hand go up the other side. And that's neurologically with better. Anyway, okay, very good. So now I think we're perfectly prepared to talk about a very boring subject, rules for digital trade. Who knows how or what trade rules for digital trade look like? Do we see them in agreements? Are they domestic regulations? You know, what do these rules look like? Has anybody ever seen a digital trade rule? No? Well, that does not surprise me because like everything to do with digital, it's all very new and we're kind of making it up as we go along. So mostly they are domestic regulations. Like if you have anything to do with services trade, you know, a lot of the like trade rules are actually embodied in domestic regulations. They might not necessarily even be aimed at trade, but if you're selling services into a market, you can find them. But we're also increasingly seeing lots of trade agreements building in rules, so-called, around how trade goes across the border. So there are FTAs, there's the big WTO agreement, there are various regional agreements. But before we look at those, why should we bother with digital trade rules? Actually, I think that's clicked through. Whoops. Oh, whoops. Okay, we may never get back there. Previous. Okay, why should we bother with digital trade rules, do you think? Because, you know, we've seen already that huge growth in data flows, it's all going amazingly. Why do you need rules?
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like trading goods, we have trade rules to ensure that there's a predictable environment. Would it be that we need the same for the digital world?
That could be, that's perfect, spot on. So particularly when everything's moving so quickly and new technologies are popping out of the woodwork, yeah, we want a stable, predictable environment for our businesses and for our governments as well, of course. So yeah, that's a really big reason. Any others? If you skip ahead to the slides, you can answer this question. Okay, let me pop it up. So predictable trading environment, perfect. And also for consumers as well. And I mean, we know this ourselves, don't we? It's like someone sends you an email, you think, should I click on this link? Maybe not, if I'm not sure. Or yeah, should I, this company looks legitimate, but maybe it isn't, you know, a few spelling mistakes there, not safe. We also want to create new trade opportunities. So there's a lot of, you know, analytical work that says, oh, this is amazing, huge growth opportunity, but how do we actually ensure that for our businesses? You know, a Wild West sort of kind of crazy, unregulated space isn't necessarily the best. We can also actually boost our goods trade by using some of those digital tools, but often you need rules around that to make sure it's interoperable and so on. But also those trade barriers we just talked about that are growing crazily. You know, we want digital agreements to make sure that we don't just see protectionism going up and up. And also some of these new technologies, AI, quantum, I mean, it's probably too soon to say what the rules should be, and even maybe should there be rules, but, you know, there's definitely, I think, a very strong suggestion that we might need to because of the sort of pervasiveness and the impact. So, for instance, quantum computing, I don't know if you guys have kind of read or heard much about that, but if you talk to any bank or financial institution or people who deal with a lot of confidential data, they're scared about quantum because it could, like that, just break any sort of encryption or protection or whatever. So, maybe we need rules about how that's actually able to be deployed. And there's a lot of evidence to say that, I have taken the slides out because it's a lot to get through, but there have been some quite interesting studies done recently that do suggest that having the rules actually leads to more growth than not. So like there is a point to it. So what have we seen in terms of the way the rules have evolved over time? So we know that, basically remember that slide of the data flows back in 2004, there really wasn't much of this stuff going on. And indeed that has been reflected in the rule book. So the WTO had a little bit of sort of has some fundamental ideas which kind of apply, but none of it was really written with the digital economy in mind. But then over time, we started to see e-commerce chapters, as they were called originally, and now digital trade chapters going into FTAs. And then this is sort of the area that we're in now, a much more modern look at how do you write trade rules for the digital economy. So there's been this WTO plurilateral process, which I don't believe any Pacific economies are part of, but has tried to sort of set a little bit of a kind of global benchmark for what some rules could look like. And then there are a whole bunch of modern FTAs and other digital economy agreements, that's what DEA stands for, that have tried to kind of write the rules in a very bespoke way for digital. And we're going to look at those in particular. Now, lots of these are among advanced economies or, wealthier developing economies. But I thought it was worth just highlighting, there are also some, for instance, Africa is really at the cutting edge of innovation in this space, and they've got some really interesting models of how you might do it for lots of developing economies. Pardon me. So, this was just to kind of recap, this was the height of technology at the time that most of the WTO rules were written. I don't know if anybody here, remembers faxes, but, not quite the same as a quantum computer. But surprisingly, even though the internet didn't kind of really exist back in those days, a lot of these core WTO rules actually are quite, relevant to how digital trade takes place. Albeit that, they weren't designed for that. There have been some WTO dispute cases that have confirmed that the existing rulebook is technologically neutral. So even though digital didn't exist, those rules apply whatever the technology. But we see, sort of specific rules in the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, the GATT, which is the goods equivalent, the Trade Facilitation Agreement. There's a plurilateral called the Information Technology Agreement, which is about those sort of physical hardware, and then some other things. All of those things are a sort of baseline, if you like. Some of the core principles around non-discrimination and most favored nation and so on are already essentially should apply to digital trade. But some much more interesting stuff has been done subsequently. Now, I thought it was worth just touching briefly on a couple of WTO things because they're very topical. I'm not sure how closely you're following it, but in a month or so's time, we've got the WTO ministerial in Yaoundé in Cameroon, and there are a couple of big digital issues that will be considered. One is this thing called the Commerce Moratorium. Has anybody heard of that or read about it, worked on it? Yeah. Would you like to, if you're comfortable, share what is it and why should people hear about it?
E-commerce moratorium.
Yeah.
Is it the tax that is imposed on electronic transactions?
Exactly. Yeah.
Moratorium.
Exactly. So this is this thing, tariffs. If you have anything to do with goods trade, especially these days, all about tariffs. So that's your container of palm oil or whatever is going across the border, it's got to pay a tax at the border, the tariff. But traditionally, services and digital haven't had to pay tariffs. That's just not a thing under the WTO rules. But there's been a lot of debate over quite a few years now about whether or not it's fair that digital trade should not have to pay any kind of tariff. And particularly for things that were once physical, like a book that's now transmitted digitally. You know, I read it on my Kindle. It's still the same book, but it's just digital. So is it fair that it doesn't have to pay tariffs? So that's one argument. The people who think there should be tariffs because it's, you know, otherwise it's kind of creating these crazy incentives for everything to be digital and not physical. And it's a real world thing because for lots of governments, they get, you know, a lot of money to run the country from tariffs. So there's a real revenue thing here that's going on. And then on the other hand, there are people who say, well, actually, since the birth of the internet, since 1998, essentially, there haven't been any tariffs on digital trade. And that's because we've had this thing, the moratorium, which was everybody agreeing, well, look, we're not sure about this thing called the internet that's just started, and it looks like maybe there'll be some trade, we're not sure, but let's just agree we won't impose any tariffs on it because, you know, we're not quite sure what we're dealing with here. And so this thing, the moratorium, was put in place, and over the years it has been repeated, and then it's due to come to a sticky end in March at the WTO ministerial. Now, there are lots of complexities to this issue that we don't have time to go into, but essentially, what is an electronic transmission? Is that the same thing as digital trade or something different? Is it the content that we're concerned about, or the fact that it's a digital transaction, or a transmission, I should say? If you're going to put customs duties on it, what level should the customs duties be? Does it apply just to services? Does it apply to things that were once physical that are now services, or does it apply to everything? So there are lots and lots of questions. Even the people who want to get rid of this moratorium don't have a clear view on that, and the rest of the world certainly doesn't as well. So it's a really complicated issue. It touches on development, fairness, economics, legal stuff, technology, technologically, the way transmissions come across the border. So if I send an email, for instance, it might actually be broken up into 100 little packets of data that might go all different ways and then land in my inbox and my server in the country. But where has that come from? Who's paying the tariff? What tariff should you pay? So there are lots of complexities about this. The OECD has also done some work on, okay, what are the economic implications if we get rid of this thing? And in fact, their work is that it's only a tiny share of potential government revenue, but it has a huge economic impact in the negative direction if we start charging tariffs on digital trade. So there's also been a very controversial paper written by an UNCTAD economist that argues the other way. We're missing out on billions of dollars. I'm very happy to share links to all of that. We don't have time to go through the ins and outs, unfortunately, but it's a fascinating subject. That will be, you know, probably one of the only things that maybe will be agreed or maybe not in a month's time. Any questions on that? Or whenever. Okay. All right. Okay, sounds good. All right. So that's a fascinating issue. And then the other really interesting big issue that the WTO is grappling with at the moment is, I mentioned before, this agreement on e-commerce that a big group, so about over 90 participants took part in these plurilateral negotiations. They've come up with an agreement which actually at this point only about 70-ish participants have said they want to sign on to. And this is trying to set a sort of baseline global set of rules for the digital economy. Now, why do you think countries might have done that? Why are they bothering to try and come up with a new global agreement on digital trade?
Probably um. Before the. TFA,
Yeah,
the borders, the created the borders were kind of questionable, wasn't that. Time to clear the. Consignment, it took a lot of time.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
They came up with WTO came up with the TFA,
Mhm.
so now it split the time at the border.
Yeah.
So-
Do you think, has that made a big difference in Papua New Guinea, do you think? Or-
Yes, yes.
Yeah, around the Pacific, yeah. So we can see some of those rules about digital actually are really helpful, can't we? So, and so do you think that might have been part of the rationale for this as well? Yeah,
So all the member states are on the same page. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and come digital.
exactly. That's a really great answer. Any other reason why people might have, I mean, this is the sort of the whole paperless trade part of it. Any other reasons, do you think? Well, one of the reasons is because we're seeing those rising restrictions and we're also seeing lots of little agreements. So FTAs, maybe between two countries or a few countries, and these digital economy agreements that we're going to talk about soon. All of those are great, but it contributes to the noodle bowl that I mentioned, where there are lots and lots of different rules.
Yeah.
And one of the supposed benefits of digital is that you can just be agile, you can go anywhere, you know, I can sit at my kitchen table and sell you some services, whatever. But if there are 1,000 different little agreements, you don't actually get to realize those benefits, because I think, oh, well, to sell to you, I need to do this, and to sell to you, I actually have to do this. And so all those benefits are lost. So there's a big compelling case to have a sort of the biggest possible universe that are covered by the same rules. And so that was a big driver. And they've largely succeeded. Some of the most tricky issues around data governance aren't part of this. Some of the really big, important digital economies like India aren't part of it. Lots of LDCs and developing economies around the Pacific aren't part of it. But, you know, it's a good start. But unfortunately, the other big thing that you're going to see in a month's time at this WTO ministerial is a big argument about, well, what do we do with plurilateral agreements like this one? And there are a few others as well. Can we just bring those into the rule book or leave them out? And a lot of politics around it all. So another mildly interesting thing to watch out for. Okay, well, we might take a little break now. We're just coming up to sort of afternoon tea time. Let me just quickly tell you about what you've got to look forward to after your cup of tea. Some more brain activity. I have got another fun exercise, which I think you'll enjoy as well. But on the more boring side of things, we're going to also look at FTAs and digital economy agreements. We're going to look at a few issues relating to development in digital trade, potentially a really fantastic opportunity, but a lot of challenges as well. And then we're going to do breakout groups. So hope you're feeling chatty and brainstorming for that. But right now we're going to have a break of
15 minutes.
15 minutes. So please enjoy your afternoon tea. See you back here.
Thank you.
In fact, only the duty of work on agriculture,
I did, yeah,
trade. etc.
yeah.
Yeah, so the moment PNG is trying to motion with UAE,
Yes, yes, I did.
myself, so
Yeah.
I'm on the SPS.
Oh,
uh,
yeah, great.
So
I imagine there are a lot of complexities
Yes.
around that
Yeah.
and domestic capacity and
Yes.
labs and things, yeah.
so, do you have a business card or something like that? Maybe your email is there.
Yeah, I think.
I think you
Do they have my email address or?
They,
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
and it's, oh yeah, it's on the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to talk to
Yeah.
you about all of that. We've also, I'm going to be doing a session on agriculture and fisheries as part of this course as well, I think, maybe next week sometime or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, I'm very happy to have a chat about that. Yeah, but you know, because that's my first love, all that agriculture stuff. It's so complicated, but you know, it's so important. This is fascinating, but you know, if I'm honest, the agriculture is the real world, isn't it? It's where, I mean, for New Zealand and PNG, lots of our small businesses and family farms and things are.
since human beings came to be.
Exactly,
It's a
exactly.
process.
That's exactly right. And you know, what's that thing? We're only 3 meals away from the revolution or whatever, you know, without food,
That's right.
there's not much we're going to do otherwise, is there? Yeah.
Some people that don't come up with the idea, going food in the American.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So have you started the negotiation with the UAE yet?
No, we did last year in November, we had
Yeah.
first consultation
Yeah.
with the stakeholders
Yeah.
from private and the government. We provide tax.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, because New Zealand just concluded our FTA with the UAE as well, and I think it was done incredibly quickly. I mean, I think they were very motivated to get it done quickly, but I can imagine, you know, there should be some good, hopefully some good synergies. You know, they're clearly going to be keen to import from you and to export.
I think there are more than trades. I think having the Indonesia person Singapore.
Yeah. But hopefully lots of good opportunities for PNG, but I guess if you can't get the SDS
Yes,
conditions and requirements right, that pretty quickly kills off the trade, doesn't it?
That's right.
If you've got to go through. I remember quite a few years ago now, my business partner and I did a course for some officials in the Caribbean. Some very similar issues, as you know, small island states as well, around, they have this great access to the EU. But there was only one lab in the Caribbean that could do the SPS testing and things. So it's like, oh, great outcome here, but oh, sorry, nobody can basically actually export because, you know, we couldn't apply the requirements.
don't you get in the Pacific, we don't have the capacity, we can have a kind of a central lab,
Yeah,
so that it will be easy to maintain the environment for labs are quite expensive.
they are incredibly, and especially since particularly for, you know, very fussy markets,
Yes.
they will need like, right, very nuanced, you know, things, don't they? So, yeah.
And the Japanese, they want everything.
Exactly, my God. Yeah, so hopefully that wouldn't be such an issue for the UAE, but I suppose, you know, still be a minimum. So is there already a centralised sort of lab testing facility in the Pacific or in PNG?
We are, but it's not like, it's not within the capacity.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Tricky. Well, I'd love to chat further about all of that. And we are going to do two things in our remaining time. We're going to look at some of the sort of modern trade rules in this space, FTA and digital economy agreements. And then we're going to dig in a little bit more to the sort of development, digital divide issues, and finish up with a fun exercise on, you know, how do you design good strategy and good trade policy in this area. So let's look at FTAs first of all. And this has really been a growth industry around the world. Since 2000, so over the last 26 years, About half of all FTAs have had digital provisions. But as you can well imagine, in the early days, there were only a few. Now, basically, almost every FTA that's struck has a digital provision in it, or more probably actually a full chapter. And so over time, we're seeing this sort of growth of essentially trade policy making, trade law making, and not just in terms of being visible, but also over time, these rules have become more comprehensive, they've become deeper, they've become more binding. Now, these are big generalizations. You can find plenty of very recent agreements that might not, necessarily have a lot in them, but basically that's the overarching trend. And there's an amazing, I think she's a legal scholar, called Mira Buri, who works at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, who's done a lot of work in this. She's got a big database called Taped, which has got all the trade agreements. So if you're interested in this area, you can easily Google that and find, a lot of great insights about all of this. But I think it's worth trying to break down those sort of big numbers into a little bit more detail. So essentially, if we just look at the kind of core area of digital trade rulemaking, which is around data flows, what we can see is there are three broad approaches that you can see across these different trade agreements. And you can see I've put the little kind of flags there. There's been a lot of, if you look at the literature in this area, scholars have written lots of articles about the three data realms or digital empires, and in very crude terms, we could say it's the US model, the China model, and the EU model, or the Brussels model. So the first one, the US model, we can see sort of most clearly articulated in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, known to its friends as the CPTPP. Now, of course, if you're familiar with the CPTPP, you'll know, well, hang on a second, the US is not in that trade agreement, but it's known as the US model because when the US was still part of that, when it was the TPP, it was largely responsible for driving this sort of template for how you write rules for data flows. And that is basically data should flow freely. That's your default. Any data to any market should be able to flow. You should not be able to impose data localization. What is data localization? Does anybody know, or do you want to take a stab at what that is?
Storing the data at a particular location.
Bingo, that's exactly it. So this idea of if you want to process data or store it, it's got to be in the market. Now, why would you care about that? Well, if you're a small business, say Honey Consulting wants to do big business in, I don't know, Indonesia, I could do it sitting at home in Auckland. It's all great. I deal with my customers' data. It's stored in some, I don't know, probably some Amazon Web Services type of data center in Sydney or something, whatever. But if you're Indonesia, you say, no, if you want to deal with the data of my citizens, you have to have it stored in Indonesia. So what does that do for my business model as a, naive young trade policy consultant? I suddenly have to think, okay, how am I going to get a server in Indonesia to store this data? What's the data protection? How much does it cost? How do I even go about it? So for small businesses or big businesses as well, but this is a model that says, well, I want to keep things simple and cheap for businesses. I'm not going to oblige people to store the data. But there are, of course, legitimate reasons why you might want to store the data there. So if you talk to your treasury, your central bank, they say, well, we need the financial services data here because, there's a whole lot of prudential concerns and, whatever. So where there are legitimate public policy reasons under this model, you're allowed to store the data or require it to be stored somewhere or restricted. So that's largely driven through a sort of business lens. I want to create an enabling environment for my businesses, CPTPP. Then there's this next one, the China model, as it's called. RCEP. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. These terrible trade agreements with impossible names, but anyway, RCEP. Now, it's called the China model, even though there are actually 16 members of that agreement, because China is a very sort of influential, or has been a very influential part of the way its e-commerce chapter was written, which looks a lot like CPTPP, free flow of data, no forced data localization, but the exceptions are much, much broader. So basically in RCEP, you've got a lot more policy space to say, well, yeah, free flow, but actually I've got a whole lot of concerns about where the data is processed or whether it can flow at all. So I get to say, if I want to make an exception and restrict it or require it to be stored here, I get to call the shots on that. It doesn't have to be legitimate, doesn't have to be any sort of public policy goal. I just have to say what it is. And it goes even beyond that and talks about, there are also legitimate national security reasons why I might want to do that, but I get to decide what those are. So much more policy space in this model. And then EU, until recently, the Europeans, who are, the sort of first or second biggest exporter of digital services in the world, didn't have anything on data rules in their FTAs because they think the most important thing is privacy. It's a human right, and that's not something you negotiate away in a trade agreement. So they say, well, I'm not even talking about that because I've got, does anybody know what the big EU data regulation is called? It's got a four-letter acronym, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. We've got GDPR, everybody around the world has to comply with that, so we don't need to put it in a trade agreement. But recently, they've actually started to move more to one of these models, maybe probably closest to RCEP, because they still want a lot of control. So those are the three realms, and if you look at any FTA, it's probably close to one of those three models. So in terms of the evolution, we've had FTAs, then over sort of the last 5 or 6 years, we've had another model, which is called digital economy agreements. So this isn't a comprehensive trade agreement. It's like a specific digital one. And the poster child of that one is the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, which New Zealand did with Singapore and Chile back in 2000. When the pandemic was raging, so it was the first ever agreement that was signed electronically as well. It's like another little, feather in its cap. But since then, there have been a whole lot more digital economy agreements, mostly led by Singapore, but ASEAN's really got into the game as well. They're doing this big digital economy framework agreement right now. The EU started using a very similar model. So this is a kind of a very modern thematic agreement that looks not just at those data issues, but a whole raft of things, paperless trade and AI and you name it, it's in there. And then we're also seeing that model then translated back into various FTAs, that WTO agreement I talked about, the African digital protocol I mentioned, and a whole lot of other sort of more modern agreements. So just a few minutes on digital economy agreements. So these are digital only. They've got some quite interesting innovations, not just that they're only about digital, but also because they are essentially designed as building blocks. So a lot of them are modular. They've got, kind of, instead of in a traditional agreement, you might have different chapters. They've got modules, which might look at things like business trust or innovation. So they're sort of very thematic in the way they're organized. They tend to be very broad. So the raft of things from, electronic transactions frameworks to data innovation, to paperless trade, to inclusion for women. So a big sort of broad sweep of issues. And a lot of them are really essentially like a laboratory for trade policy. So a lot of them are about cooperation, about collaboration, innovation. They're not really writing hard law binding rules in the same way that traditional FTAs have done. And so I'll let you have a quick look at this, but basically you can sort of see there the breadth of these agreements, much bigger than the traditional FTA models, which might have just had a few of these elements included. They're very agile, they're intended to be updated regularly with new issues, and countries can come aboard. So for instance, the DEPA, which started with 3, then Korea joined a couple of years ago, and there's a queue of about sort of 6 or 8 countries that are wanting to join. And sort of like the snowball is gathering momentum as it goes down the hill. They're about facilitating end-to-end transactions with all these different tools, e-invoicing and e-payments and so on. Trust is central. So business to business, business to consumer, government to government, lots of ways to sort of build trust in the digital environment. Inclusion is central. So recognizing that there's a digital divide and this enormous development potential, but that you actually need to be deliberate about that and can facilitate that. And then, of course, everything digital is about disruption and innovation. So they try to anticipate where the technology is going as well, and ways to, you know, kind of write good rules for those new elements. Okay, so any questions on that before we get into sort of digital development and then our group exercise? No, okay. Let us spend a minute then before we get into this next bit, doing some more brain gym, because this is the bit where you guys are going to have to really be firing on all cylinders strategically. So this time, don't worry, there's no group involved, but I do want people to stand up, if you might be so kind. So please, everybody, arise. Now, this one is called ABC 1, 2, 3. And again, it's about getting both hemispheres in the brain working together. So if you're right-handed or left-handed, whichever hand you prefer, I'm a right-hander, so I'm going to do right hand. What I want you to do is say the letter. No, say the number and write the letter. So I'm going to say 1 and write the letter A. Actually, let's do it the other way around. It might be a bit easier. So I'm going to say A and write 1. I'm going to say B and write 2, C, D. Okay, seems so easy, right? It's not. Okay, you ready? On the count of 3, we'll go A, B, C. You ready? 1, 2, 3. And whoever can get through to Z gets. Got any prizes in the room? Chocolate fish? No, you get to feel good. Okay, you ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Numbers, right?
Yeah. So we'll say A, B, C and write the numbers. Okay, you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. A, B, C. Okay, you go. Keep going. I can't do it. If you can't keep going, you can sit down. Oh, we've got some alphabet champions in the room.
A, B,
Yeah, if you've gone past 26, there's a problem too. Yeah. Okay, give yourselves a round of applause. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it's still going. My gosh. No pressure now. Yes.
That's you.
Well, let's give everybody a big round of applause. Fantastic. Love it. Okay, very good. So now you are primed for some amazing work on digital development and in particular, how to turbocharge the development of Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu. Okay, so let's just set the scene a little bit by talking about development and digital trade. Because if you read any literature, I mean, the WTO put out a big report a couple of years ago, would be, any sort of scholarly literature, everybody says, oh, this is going to be amazing for development. It's going to turbocharge everything. It's all upside. It's incredible. You can see here, this was a picture from some EU funded program that happened in Papua New Guinea, helping farmers to use digital tools. I mean, it's all like a fantastic good news story. And that is definitely true. There's a lot to say that digital trade can potentially enable more growth, more inclusive growth. I mean, it's a really amazing potential for women, for small businesses. In New Zealand, we love to talk about the potential for sort of Indigenous growth. The Māori economy can really be supported by this, creating amazing new opportunities. And the flip side, if you say, well, yeah, but maybe I'm not sure if I really want to go there. Well, on the other hand, if you don't choose to actually make your digital economy work, you're missing opportunities and exposing yourself to risk. So on the risk side, things like cybercrime that we talked about earlier, that's coming for you, whether or not you are keen on digital trade. I mean, anybody who's on the internet is essentially vulnerable to that. So there's a sort of a push and a pull here, but also if you don't put in place the right enabling structures, you're missing out on opportunities for growth because the whole rest of the world is going down this digitalized path. So, you don't want to be left behind. However, there are so many barriers to this, as we know, we've talked about. Trade barriers, yes, but lots and lots of barriers on the domestic sort of regulatory infrastructure enablement side that need to be tackled. And there's this funny irony in, we're now at this interesting point in the world's economic history of having this new kind of trade and writing the rule book for it. So as we've just talked about, and in an ideal world, every developing economy, every developing country should be at the table writing those rules. Because you don't want to be given some rules that somebody else has written. You need to write the rules that are going to be good for you. But the conundrum here is, to do that, you actually need a lot of this stuff. You need to have the regulations, you need the skills, the literacy, the understanding of the business models and community to be able to do that. So this is a really big challenge for developing economies. And I think, it's something that's a very much a sort of real world living problem in the Pacific as well. So some of the big economic institutions and bodies have, really recognised this. So there was a great report done I think it was in 2024, put that there. This big World Trade report that the WTO does, looking at digital trade for development, which you can see there. I've sort of tried to pluck out some of the key insights from that. But basically this story around, it's profoundly positive, potentially, but also, there's a really uneven uptake and ability to take advantage. So it'll be critical to bridge the digital divide, including through donor support and whatever, domestic activity, cooperation. I mean, no one country can do this by themselves. There needs to be a lot of collaboration as well, and support needed to build some of those important enablers. The trade rules piece really needs to be worked on. At the moment, we're heading down this very, kind of crazy, confused noodle bowl. We need to actually make that a way that works for small businesses and for developing countries. And then there's a whole lot of work that needs to happen in the capacity building side. And so I've done quite a bit of work for the Asian Development Bank, for instance, on what are the building blocks that are needed in the regulatory space. So a lot of in donor programs, there's a lot of talk about infrastructure and we build some, some fibre or whatever. That's really important. But actually an insight that my work has really brought home to me in the last few years is, well, actually you need a lot of those basic regulations as well. And one of the readings that I'd shared is this UNCTAD Digital Economy Report. Let me actually go forward to this one. This is a really great resource. It's got a lot of very interesting granular information in it. Was done by UNCTAD a couple of years ago now about looking specifically at Pacific economies with the very particular challenges they have. But there's this very interesting table, which I had meant to put in the slides, but I've just brought a hard copy anyway, of looking at, I mean, what are some of the regulatory building blocks across Pacific economies, including PNG and Vanuatu, for instance, across, and so some of these categories are things like e-signatures, are they recognised as legally valid, online consumer protection, you know, cybersecurity, domain names, content regulation, digital ID, payments. And across all of these, even, you know, more advanced developing economies all around the world, but including in the Pacific, have got gaps. And these are not, oh, what's my latest AI legislation? These are the basic building blocks. So that makes it so hard for small businesses to operate. It makes it so hard for officials to negotiate trade agreements because you don't have those basic building blocks. You know, you're kind of really doing it hard to actually engage in those processes. So really recommend that, you know, for some insight on the challenge essentially. So this report, you know, talks a lot about some of the big challenges in the Pacific that I don't need to tell any of you about, around the sort of the connectivity piece, the infrastructure, but also the positive side, you know, this huge potential around e-commerce, even digitally delivered services and so on, but also kind of a work program to go ahead. And then has anybody come across this document? This is a PIF document, a sort of Pacific Regional E-commerce Roadmap. Have you seen that? Yeah. So this has also got some amazing, I mean, it's kind of coming to the end of its lifespan now, but a lot of very practical kind of, you know, what needs to be done across those domains to actually realise the potential. And then some great resources like this portal. Really recommend you check that out if you haven't come across that. I mean, it's got just so much resource links to things, but also statistics about some of the stuff, which you can also find in this detailed report. So there's a lot of information out there, a lot of good understanding of the problems. Now, solving them. Easy to say what the problem is, much harder to figure out what the solution is, which brings me to our exercise. So it would be great if you could work groups, and if you're comfortable doing it at your current tables, that's great. Or if you would like to be in bigger or smaller groups, or just do it by yourself because you can't stand the person you're sitting next to, that's also absolutely fine. But what I would like you to do is talk about, and this is not, you know, it's not going to get marked, it doesn't have to be true, but just have a chat about some of the challenges or problems you see either in your day-to-day job or in your life. You know, payments don't work, or I tried to get that thing on Amazon and it took 6 months to get there, whatever it might be. You know, I've put a few things here, but just ignore that. Whatever you think are the problems, strategic, practical, whatever they might be, and then don't just admire the problem, come up with the answers. So have a think about, okay, what is needed in a practical way to actually do something about it? Is it pass a piece of legislation? Is it educate the business community? How would you actually do that? Is it try and negotiate a trade deal? Is it talk to the donors about we need more support on regulation? Whatever it might be. So we've got half an hour, or 15 minutes. Yeah, and then we'll do a report back. Yeah. Okay, so it's now 3:11. So if you maybe spend 15 minutes or so, we'll come back together and hear what you've come up with. And just to stress, if you think, oh my God, I don't know anything about this, don't worry. This can just be from your own knowledge or completely made up. It's really just to get you thinking about the issues. So have fun, and I'll see you in 15 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Well, I hope to speak me. I hope it's been a useful discussion. I'm certainly extremely keen to hear what you've come up with, the solution to all of your country's problems. So I know everybody hates having to do the report back, but you're among friends, so just be brave. Who would like to start us off? What I would love to hear is what were your 3 problems and some ideas about how to fix them.
Since we are in the front.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I've got actually competition. Oh my goodness, yeah, thank you. Amazing. But you're, as you say, let's do it. Let's hear from you. Up to you.
My colleague and I basically came up with 3 challenges. The first one is lack of e-payment system, the infrastructure. And the second one is digital illiteracy. Not enough. And third one is regulations, the laws.
Yep, is it that they're not up to date or they're missing in some areas? Yeah, okay. Great, all right. 3 great problems. How do you fix them?
Yeah, so first one is to build up the digital infrastructure and in regard to addressing the illiteracy, there has to be a lot of awareness by the appropriate authorities, like the financial institutions.
Right. Yeah.
And then enactment of the laws, regulations.
Okay. With the infrastructure thing, how do you think, I mean, yeah, of course, really important to have that infrastructure in place. How, in a practical way, do you think you might, how would you start getting that? Is that something where you talk to donors, or is there a work program that PNG itself could put in place, or what are your ideas there? Did you get into that level of detail?
Moment there are discussions, and they were really, I think we launched like a platform. And yeah, a platform for, I think one of the main requirements is to have sort of a digital ID.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Digital ID for especially for consumer protection.
Yeah.
So yeah, because we currently we don't have we can't, you know, have international players like digital payment platforms.
Yeah.
Like Google Play or Apple.
Yeah.
Google Pay,
Yeah.
Apple Pay.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of the infrastructure, regulatory environment. Yeah. So once and then form of toolkit that comes into for awareness purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the sort of action plan going forward.
Great, love it. Yeah, well, thank you both. That's really interesting. And actually, a few years ago, I went to Papua New Guinea for some meetings, and I remember being really impressed with, I think it was the governor of the Reserve Bank or something, talking about the large unbanked population and how sort of smartphone enabled payments were really, you know, had sort of opened up the world in a really powerful way, even, you know, without a lot of the sort of traditional banking infrastructure there, things as well. So yeah, thank you. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
Right.
I think on that digital literacy, that's why not many like 80% of the population do not know how to use the digital platform.
Right. Yeah.
Commerce and that. So people are using Facebook to sell stuff.
Yeah, Facebook Market.
Yeah, but they cannot, you know, transact online. Transaction physically, exchange of cash to give.
Even though they've like bought it online.
Yes.
How interesting.
Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah. Actually, I know in Southeast Asia, that's I mean, kind of a strange model that happened
Yeah.
there as well, when somebody delivers the thing to you. you give them the money.
In some
Yeah.
occasional, they have like platforms like Lazada. and,
Yeah, but in some of the
Shopify.
poorer economies, I
Yes,
think
yes.
there's that still that very kind of weird hybrid of the old world and the new going on. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Well, thank you both. That's a great report back and really interesting issues. And what about you? Do you have the same issues, same challenges, or different set?
Yes, same issues. We came up with infrastructure skills and capacity building, laws and regulations. So in terms of infrastructure, we focus more on connectivity.
Yes.
You need connectivity, so that's from trade enabling infrastructure, where it's ports, bridges, roads, towers. So we took one example of just one issue and then tried to fit all of this in.
Right.
That connectivity, okay, in PNG right now, we're working on the single window.
Yeah.
And that's to do with paperless trade, but that kind of also links onto hard infrastructure.
It does, yeah.
With paperless trade, you're moving the document, the paper document.
Yeah.
but you also need the physical infrastructure to move
course.
the goods around.
Of course.
So it's great that we're progressing on paperless trade, but we also need to work on infrastructure. So the solution for that in PNG, we also would have a separate Connect PNG program, and that looks at infrastructure. So a solution would be tying the single window project together with the connectivity,
Yeah.
because that's the physical infrastructure in terms of the roads, the bridges, and the
Yeah.
paperless.
That's so interesting. And, you know, that really resonates with some work that I've done with New Zealand businesses too, that it's not enough just to get the digital part right. It needs everything to work seamlessly together, doesn't it?
So in terms of laws and regulation, we need a lot of that.
Yeah.
Once we have a single window, we need the appropriate regulations in place to
course.
enable e-signature, e-contracts. And to address that, we spoke about digital literacy. And we think it's important to take it from not only at the primary school level, the tertiary, but we'll also need it in the public service machinery. We have a public service administrative college where civil servants get trained.
Yeah.
We think we should be thinking ahead and include a digital literacy program.
I love that.
e-commerce and all
Yeah.
that. So it helps policymakers
Yeah.
in the government service to understand the digital environment, so we can come up with more well aware, so we can do policies that are more.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? Because I think across every country in the world, the policymakers are having this challenge too of, I mean, what on earth is this thing? How am I supposed to write a regulation about it? So yeah, I love that idea of a sort of targeted section of the training. This is fantastic. Very good. That's great. Thank you so much. What about the back corner there? What do you come up with as your problems and your solutions?
Yeah, well, there are three programs. The first one is restriction from service providers. Two is the low level of digital literacy skills.
Yeah.
And three is high cost for internet services.
Yeah, great.
Our action plan for the first one, the restriction for service providers, is to streamline licensing process with NICTA,
Yeah.
which is the regulatory agency.
And what sort of services do you have in mind there specifically? Are there any particular big categories that are problematic, or just across the board?
Yeah,
We have an issue with our regulator,
Yeah.
with Starlink coming in.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the issue. So we have done for competition. They're round that round, so it's another thing that,
Yeah.
I mean, as the competitors already on that round.
I see.
And Starlink also coming in, so
That's a story as old as time, isn't it? Yeah.
there's to be a clear guidance also.
I'm sure. Get Elon Musk on the phone, sort it out. Love it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And sorry, please continue.
our action plan for the second problem, the low level is digital. It usually is to launch digital literacy programs by partnering with NGOs, government and private sectors. And also school integration, we could use digital skills to.
I love that, yeah. Is there anything at the moment in the education curriculum on digital?
They have
A little bit, yeah.
information.
Right, yeah, yeah.
We can upgrade that.
Yeah, very good.
And for the federal levels for internet services, we is to provide competition and encourage more higher speed internet connection. Okay?
Love it.
And also for the government to subsidize.
Is that to bring the cost down or just to
Yes,
encourage
yes.
the competition? Yeah, okay, great. Very good. So I mean, at the moment, am I right in assuming that the cost is quite prohibitive? I mean, does it actually stop businesses from doing things or individuals from doing things, or, you know, what's the impact that you see of the cost of
Last
this?
example is, you, Auckland University,
Yeah.
over Wi-Fi is free.
Yeah,
In PNG, we don't have Wi-Fi, and only.
yeah, no, it's a huge problem, isn't it? Yeah. Very good. Okay, thanks. That's really, really interesting. Fantastic. Okay, you guys, who more to go? Who wants to go first? Great, go for it.
Okay, the challenge is the same as the first and the second group. Firstly, the cost of the cost is very high, it's very expensive. And we see that to reduce the cost, we see that as a government, it should allow the competitors this space. Allow ISP providers in various other mobile networks. And also build the infrastructure that will reduce the cost of internet. The other challenge is infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure. We feel that the government, the private sector should build the infrastructure that will make accessible for all to use. And then we also have reduced the cost.
Great, yeah.
And the last one, the key challenge we see is as the other group have said is a regulation, data protection.
Yeah.
So the government has to, as a government, we need to have a good policy framework that will protect the end users and the policy business.
Great, I love that. Yeah, very good, very good. Thank you. Okay, and lucky last group. The three ladies, what have you got to share with us?
Okay, so, for our group, one of the challenges or problems that we see in the country is, few regulations for consumer protection.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of small businesses and individuals, buying online consumable products. And many times they face, fraudulent, transactions. There's breach of contracts when you're selling goods online. And so we don't have specific regulations in place to be able to deal with the breach of contracts or any fraudulent transactions, protecting consumers in general.
Is there a non-digital consumer protection law already? Yeah, but there is, yeah, but not really fit for the digital world.
I think one of the actions we can address is some of the, because, goods they cross over borders.
Yeah.
So looking at international conventions that we can, like the International Sale of Goods Convention, and we can also engage into our legislations and the individual contract.
Yeah.
Other countries can so enforce some of
Indeed. And also for all of the regulations, UNCITRAL, the UN, whatever that stands for, Commission on National Treaties and things, has got a whole set of model laws on, I think there's a consumer protection one, there's definitely e-signatures and electronic transactions, electronic transferable records. So yeah, there are lots of good models out there, but of course, then I imagine challenging to actually turn that good idea into a concrete piece of legislation.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I think I'll just sum it up for the rest of the group. I think you've heard for each of the tables that we lack the legislation and the regulation. And then I'll tie my answer to the digital illiteracy. So, we do actually have a recently passed Electronic Transactions Act. So we do have the legislative framework for electronic transactions. It's just that I think we lack the awareness as to how this legislation is applied. So that's to answer that question, and I think this challenge, how we address this challenge is definitely awareness of what frameworks that we have in place already. And that not only should, the awareness not only should be in the public civil servant space, but also the business space, given that they are the ones that they deal with electronic transactions, especially online transactions. So I think the only challenge or how we would address that digital trade is having legislation and regulation as well to establish our electronic symbolism. Which we are in the process of doing that. Unfortunately, it's taking a bit of time to get there, but we will get there eventually. It's a work in progress. So yes, in the digital trade and the e-commerce space, that's where we're heading. Another thing that is very of concern or something that we're trying to address is what my colleague mentioned in terms of consumer protection. Unfortunately, we are trying to look, we don't have that online dispute resolution mechanism in place to ensure that in the event that there is a dispute in terms of online transaction, there is a platform that you go and resolve that conflict. So that's where we are in that space, and that's where we are working towards. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very interesting. And I mean, I guess even when you've got things like the single window legislation all in place, then something that we found with our businesses here is then there's the next challenge, which is to actually educate the businesses, you know, some of whom might be very small traders, to actually have their own infrastructure in place to be able to submit electronically and so on. So yeah, it's a journey, isn't it? It's a very sort of takes a lot of energy and time and money and everything else to get there. But I think, you know, there's some very compelling evidence that actually it is worth it. There is a payoff in terms of growth, inclusion, opportunity, everything else. Well, look, that has been an amazing set of discussions and feedback. Thank you. So interesting that there was a lot of common themes that came out, but also some really interesting sort of nuances to all of that. So thank you so much for your careful and creative thinking on that. We're sort of coming to the end of time, but I always do like to finish off these sessions by inviting, are there any questions that are kind of have been bubbling away in your minds, anything you want to follow up with? I should also say, I think I'll be seeing you next week for some other sessions, but you've also got my contact details, and I really mean this. You're very welcome to email questions, ask for resources, anything else. I'm more than happy to help. So anything people want to raise now or else, it's 3:47. You can, you know, get out of here into the rest of the lovely afternoon if you have, well, I think there's nothing else in the schedule, I should say. So any questions before we close? No, okay, well, look, thank you. This has been a really tough gig, Friday afternoon. You've done amazingly well. And I hope you have a lovely weekend and look forward to seeing you next week.